There is a single sentence Tertullian wrote that has been quoted for nearly 2,000 years. You've probably heard of it, even if you don't know him. But here is the twist. It doesn't mean what most people think that it means. I will reveal that famous line at the end, but first you need to meet the man behind it. The sharpest tongue of the early church, a lawyer turned Christian, who argued so fiercely that in the end, even the church itself could not quite contain him. So let's start with the video. Who was Tertullian? Well, born in Carthage around 155 AD, the same year that Irenaeus died, Tertullian was a North African, and he was trained as a lawyer in the bustling Roman colony. Carthage was no small outpost. It was the cultural heart of Roman Africa, full of trade, philosophy, and debate. When Tertullian converted to Christianity, he did not leave his courtroom instincts behind. He brought them straight into theology. His writings are not gentle reflections. They are arguments, legal briefs, polemics, and that is exactly what made him unforgettable. By Tertullian's time, the Christians were under heavy suspicion. They were accused of atheism because they rejected the Roman gods. They were rumored to practice bizarre rituals. For example, the communion. Pagans would say that Christians were cannibals because of the belief that it was the real body and blood of Jesus Christ, and persecution could break out at any moment. Rome did not care if you worshipped Jesus, as long as you also worshipped Caesar. But of course, a man cannot serve two masters, and the Christians refused, and this refusal came with blood. Tertullian had become their voice, their defender, their prosecutor against the empire itself. So, if Irenaeus was a careful historian, Tertullian, on the other hand, was like a flamethrower. Firstly, he wrote in Latin, not Greek, making him the first major Christian author in the language of Rome. He would also coin terms that would shape theology forever. Words such as trinitas, substantia, persona, which obviously means trinity, substance, and person respectively. Without Tertullian, Christian theology might not even have its vocabulary. Or if it did, it would be very different to what we know today. He was also sarcastic, biting, almost savage. When pagans mocked Christians for being weak, he would flip it back onto them, in the famous line that we will get onto later on. Next, Tertullian was not just a loud person. He was brilliant. Obviously, I mentioned the Trinity earlier. Well, he gave the church a framework for speaking about this doctrine, about the belief of one God in three persons. His formula wasn't exactly perfect, but it would set the stage for later theology. He also went up against heresies that denied Jesus' humanity. Obviously, back in the Roman times, the major heresy about denying Jesus' humanity was obviously Docetism. The belief that, well, Jesus was truly divine and that his humanity was not actually there. Tertullian insisted that Christ was fully God and fully man, which we would know as the two natures of Christ. And for him, in regards to martyrdom, suffering was not just a failure, it was the victory. Every death in the arena was not just an ending, but it was a seed planted that would grow into new believers. Now, this is where our story of Tertullian gets interesting. Obviously, historical figures are just people. And Tertullian is no god himself, he is a man. And this is where we get the first church father who actually has a controversial side. Here is the part that most people don't know. Tertullian eventually became disillusioned with the church. He thought that Christians were getting too soft, too willing to compromise with Rome, too comfortable. So he joined a radical movement called Montanism, which was a prophetic sect that demanded stricter discipline, ecstatic prophecy, and zero tolerance for compromise. This would later be known as a heresy in the church. And this is the paradox of Tertullian. The man who gave the church some of its most important tools eventually walked away from the mainstream church itself. And yet, his words kept echoing long after he was gone. Now, the one line that we have all been waiting for. Tertullian says The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. People quote it as if Tertullian was in fact celebrating martyrdom as a sort of recruitment strategy, like, Rome's version of like an author bro. But here is the reality. He was not just writing a slogan, he was writing a courtroom defense. Remember when I said he was a lawyer before being Christian? He was telling Rome, every time you kill a Christian, more of them will appear. Every drop of Christian blood does not destroy us, it multiplies us. And it was not marketing, it was defiance. Obviously, we see how this plays out in the early church. We go back to the very beginning. We go back to the apostles themselves. We go to Ignatius of Antioch. We go to Polycarp of Smyrna. They died. They were executed by Rome. Yet the fact that we end up talking about people like Irenaeus, like Tertullian, and even myself, the fact that the church still exists today is proof that what Tertullian said was not wrong, and that the Christian church, no matter how many people die for it, still continues to prosper. And that's Tertullian in a nutshell. Fierce, brilliant, and uncompromising. A man whose words were too sharp to fade, even if his path eventually cut him away from the church itself. So why should we care about Tertullian, a man who existed several centuries ago, almost 2 millennia? Well, it's because he shows us that Christianity did not just survive through gentle preaching. It survived through fire, argument, and defiance. And also because Tertullian is the one who gives us the language to talk about God, Christ, and the Trinity. And obviously, because of his paradox, a man who gave everything to defend the church but then left it reminds us that even our own heroes and historical figures are complicated and multifaceted. Now, if I was to try and bring it up to a modern example like I did in my previous video, we could talk about the fact that most mainline churches have gone soft, and perhaps Tertullian was right. But when the mainline churches become soft, as we see in many Protestant sects, we see that in fact the conservatives, the people who believe in this hardcore Christianity, who want to be stricter with the rules, instead of staying in the mainline church, just like how Tertullian could have stayed in his own church. No, instead what they do is they break off from the mainline church and they form their own different mini sects within that church, where they do their own more conservative practicing. And well, in short, this is wrong. You don't want this to happen because it splits up Christianity instead of uniting it. Because people are leaving, it means that the church is now more open to heresy as a whole. It's more open to errors as a whole. And that is not what needs to be happening. Instead, if you are, for example, a conservative who has done this, what really needs to happen is you need to go back to the mainline church and try and change it from the inside. Exactly what, for example, Redeemed Zuma is talking about with the Protestant sects. That they, instead of needing to split off and form your own different, more conservative branches that stray from the mainline church, instead you need to stick within the church and keep it united. And keep it as it is intended to be. So, that's Tertullian. Lawyer, theologian, firebrand, the first Christian to write exclusively in Latin, and maybe the loudest voice of his age. Oh, and there's one early Christian who couldn't stand men like Tertullian. Instead of arguing, he tried to blend philosophy and faith, reason and revelation. In the next video, I will dive into the life of Origen, the genius who wanted to explain Christianity to the entire ancient world. Now, thank you for coming to my video. As I said, I will mention Origen next time, possibly tomorrow or maybe the day after. If you liked the video, make sure you obviously like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And feel free to comment any criticisms or compliments towards my video. It would really help me because I am trying to experiment with different styles. Thank you for coming, and God bless.